What I fell in love with in the Marine Corps was the Marines. And I did also really love the flying. Everything was compartmentalized. I was armored up. No matter what happened around me, I was not affected by it. I crossed over from not being scared of dying to just accepting that that was probably going to happen and being okay with it. I had just sort of accepted at some point I'm probably going to die in this aircraft, and that's just how it's going to be, and I was okay with that.
November 2025 marks the United States Marine Corps' 250th birthday. And to celebrate here on the Fighter Pilot Podcast, we are dedicating the month to the Corps with episodes featuring hard-charging devil dogs like retired Lieutenant Colonel Isaac Lee, who joins me in studio today. Whiskey, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, and especially on the Fighter Pilot Podcast. As a rotary wing guy, I feel like an interloper on the range, but it's good to be here.
Well, we have had episodes on helicopters, bombers, cargo, spy, everything. So I just thought it was kind of a clever name when it came to my mind one day way back a long time ago. So.
That's good stuff. Thank you. I appreciate being here.
No, you're welcome. Hey, so you spent a 20-year career mainly flying the CH-53E Echo Super Stallion. You deployed to the Middle and Far East multiple times. And when you retired in 2017, you decided to write your memoir. It's called Hangar 4. It's sitting right here on the table between us. Why?
I did. Well, thank you for asking. So it started well with me just being a nerd. So when I went to officer candidate school, for some reason, I decided to start keeping a journal. And it was primarily because I found the drill instructors so entertaining that I didn't want to forget anything that they said. So at night, when I was trying to not fall asleep, I'd scribble down a few notes of what happened during the day. And for some reason, I just never stopped doing that. So throughout the 20-year career I had, I kept this journal, and I'm super organized and, again, a huge nerd. So it was electronic. It was it was there. It was easy to go back and reference. Mm-hmm. But I transitioned out in 2017, and like everyone else, got busy, focused on the next phase of life. I've got to find a job. I got to start a new career. I got to make sure my kids are good. And I kind of forgot about it. But what happened, honestly, was in 2021, I'd been out for about 4 years, and I just kept hearing more and more about peers that I'd served with that were having a hard time in different capacities. Everyone's having a hard time holding down a job, staying married, substance abuse problems. And I knew what was wrong with them. I knew what was bothering them. And so initially I was just trying to reach out to help, like as a friend. And I eventually came to the conclusion that maybe if I went back to this journal and turned it into a really honest book, a story of my journey, that it might in some way be helpful to those people. And that was really the why behind the project. So I sat down in early 2022 and just started outlining and writing. And about a year later, I had a draft I was happy with, started chopping it around to publishers, had to send it to the Pentagon to get cleared because I'd been involved in quite a few things that had been secret at the time. And then it all just kind of came together from there and ultimately published last spring in April of 2024.
And you sent it to me as an enthusiastic, if you will, encouragement to cross the finish line in my own memoir. And I have to say, my memoir, by comparison to yours, is almost like rainbows and unicorns. It's kind of light and airy and fun.
Right.
Dude, yours is like dark and gritty. I mean, it's like, first off, there's some very colorful language, but it's just like you really feel the raw, just gritty emotion of being both a Marine and a Super Stallion pilot. So I really appreciated that just sort of raw, hey, this is what I experienced and the messed up things that we saw and said and did.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I really set out to do that intentionally. I wanted it to be like the most honest portrayal that I could possibly depict for anyone who picked this up. I just felt like that authenticity was important, not just so that people could understand, say, what it was like to serve during that time in the military, but also just get a look inside what our service members are literally dealing with and carrying and trying to balance on a day-to-day basis as they're doing these things. And it's easy to look back and only remember the good things and the happy things and talk about how everyone was amazing and all of our leaders were the best in the world, but it's really not true. The reality is it's dirty and gritty and bad things happen and you have to deal with them and then go home and pretend like you're a normal person even though you kind of don't feel like you are anymore. And I wanted to bring all of that together into just a real authentic portrayal of the experience.
Yeah. Yeah, and we'll get into some of that, both grittiness, but also bringing that home. We had an episode about the home front, and I know when I've tried to either bring the humor home or even just the debriefing style that we're used to, it doesn't work at home so well. So I've definitely struggled with that myself. Also, here on the Fighter Pilot Podcast, we had episode 122 dedicated to the CH-53. And that was with Matthew Bowman, right?
Yep,
Twitch.
Yeah, he and I served together, spent some time in the squadron together circa 2010, 2011.
Right. Terrific. I should have reached out and seen how he was doing because I think he was just getting on at a regional, so hopefully he's jumped to a major airline by now. But at any rate, just for those who maybe haven't listened to that one or don't remember, give us a quick overview of what the CH-53 Echo is and how it serves the Corps.
So in the United States Marine Corps, on the rotary wing side, we have assault support platforms, and then we call them guns, skid squadrons. So assault support is CH-53s, and when I started, it was also the CH-46, and eventually switched over to the MV-22 Osprey. But the CH-53 is the heavy lift asset in the Marine Corps arsenal. So really just built to carry a lot of people or a lot of things, move them around the battle space. The assumption, I think, about the 53 is that it's generally logistical in nature, which is true. However, as the war progressed after 9/11, it became more and more involved in named operations and more high-speed tactical missions, somewhat out of necessity, but also just because the aircraft has such unique capabilities.
Yeah.
So 53 squadrons were deployed, to the Middle East nonstop from essentially right after 9/11 until just a few years ago. So the squadrons were on this endless rotation, and by virtue of timing, I got to be part of that.
I think of the CH-53 as sort of the helicopter equivalent of the F-14, which both are like the American late 60s, early 70s muscle car. Just big and loud, does the job, and you're just proud to be associated with it,
It is.
I never flew the F-14, but every guest we've had on, in fact, we have our own show about it, has always said, it was the quintessential fighter, at least for its era. And whenever I see a CH-53, and blessed to still see some flying around here in San Diego, I'm sure you do too,
Yep.
It's always just stop what you're doing and watch because it's pretty amazing.
It really is an amazing machine. It's one of those things, I remember the first time I looked at it just thinking I can't believe that thing actually flies. I mean, it's not pretty. It looks like a school bus with a rotor on top of it, but what it can actually do is pretty incredible.
Yeah. Well, does it actually fly or does the Earth just repel it? Because you're the one who said ugly. So
Yeah, it's probably a little of both in the case of the 53.
Well, I was always, even in the service, but certainly here on the show, very slow to insult any other platform, especially the helicopters, because I didn't want to be the guy in the water one night and have the rescue guys show up and say, "Oh, it's Jello. We'll just let him float around a little while longer." But let's use Hangar 4 to inform our discussion today because, again, it's such a great book. I enjoyed it. Thank you. This particular one is my copy. You inscribed it to me and again, helped me get over the finish line with my own memoir. But you started off, as I understand, a Texas boy. Your father was a football coach.
Yep.
I don't think maybe there was a cousin in the Marines, but not a lot of influential Marine military people. What made you decide to serve, especially flying?
There really weren't. Growing up I grew up in Lubbock, Texas, dusty West Texas town. Like you said, my dad's a high school football coach, so he's call it a D-list celebrity in my hometown. But I grew up on the dusty ball fields of West Texas, and the focus of everything in our home growing up was sports. There were two seasons, football season, baseball season. You might shoot a couple of hoops in between. That was it. That was life. And that was really my focus the entire time I was growing up. And I was a decent athlete in a town that had, several of them. And it was a fun way to grow up. But what happened with me is I got into college, I stopped playing sports, and quickly, honestly, just felt kind of lost. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I didn't really know what I wanted to be. I was going to school because I was supposed to. I was getting good grades, but I was looking for something that I could feel like I was a part of. And what I missed the most about team sports was the team itself. So about halfway through college, I kind of got this wild idea that maybe if I went into the military, I could find that same feeling, that same team feeling with, what was at the time in my mind, just a different locker room to be in with a bunch of great guys with a common purpose. And that's really where it started. But we did have Reese Air Force Base on the outskirts of town at the time. And from my parents' home, you could see the training aircraft in the pattern every now and then. And mind you, at this time, I'd been in a commercial aircraft as a passenger, I think, twice. That's how much I knew about aviation. So I had this moment where I was really thinking about all this. I went out to my parents' house one night. My dad's sitting in the driveway, like he always did in the summer, having a screwdriver. So I grab a lawn chair and a beer, and we start talking. And I proceed to tell him, I don't like college. I don't like what I'm studying. I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And he gets very frustrated, of course. So he ultimately says, well, what are you going to do? And in that moment, from their driveway, you could see the aircraft in the pattern over at Reese Air Force Base. They were out flying that night. And I just pointed at him and said, I'm going to do that. And he kind of looked at me quizzically, like, you're going to do what? And I was like, I'm going to be a pilot in the military. He didn't say a word. He looked at me like it was the dumbest thing I'd ever said, which was a fair reaction given the context of the conversation. And he just got up and went in the house. He didn't say anything else. But in that moment, I was convinced. I was like, I'm doing that. And I knew nothing about it at the time. But that was my inspiration. I started to chase it. And sure enough, a couple years later, I was headed off to officer candidate school with a flight contract.
And not to get ahead too much, but I'm guessing you found what you were looking for in that Marine Ready Room.
I found exactly what I was looking for. It turned out that instinct, that gut intuition I had was 100% correct. It was perfect.
Whiskey, I think of all the things that my life, the twists and turns, that's from 2017. I also retired that year on. I lost my brother, I lost my dog, and not to minimize those, but I think losing the ready room is one of the hardest things I've had to deal with. I miss it deeply. In my work as an airline pilot, you have one person you fly with for a couple of days, and you might bond a little bit, but then you're gone and it's over. And I'll tell you a quick story, sea story actually, because it applies. We went out on a fishing boat recently. My middle son is a college senior, and he had his buddy he's been to college with the whole time, and then his dad, and then me, and a bunch of other kids. And we went out spearfishing. And it was just one of these days where it felt like the ready room was going off to do something, and I just lit up, and my son was like, what's going on? Why are you so happy? I'm like, I miss this. You had a common thing to do. You're out on the boat, you're going out and doing something cool. And we got a lot of fish that day, and had some that night, and I just, I'm looking for that, to be honest.
Yeah, that's awesome. I totally understand that. I often say, I don't necessarily miss the Marine Corps, but I miss the Marines, very much so. It was just that kinship, the camaraderie, the whatever unit you're in, it just always felt good being around everyone else.
You go to flight school. You, by your account in the book, have jet grades. And a lot of people who write this show say, what happens if I don't get jets? You had a different experience. You had a mentor who basically said, well, what do you want to do? And this is the best way to do it. So tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, he was amazing. So primary flight training, of course, I go in like everyone else wanting to be a fighter pilot, right? Top Gun generation, probably watched Top Gun 50 times before I went to officer candidate school. That was the plan. But I run into this mentor who was a Marine Corps major at the time, and this guy was like a real-life action figure. 6'4", shaved head, square jaw,
ripped,
Cobra pilot, jacked, had done an exchange tour with the Task Force 160th, which I, at the time, didn't really even understand what that was. I had to go do some internet homework and figure out. But by all accounts, this guy was like a total badass. I wanted to be him. So I get to the end of primary. My grades were good. So I went to him and I was like, hey, sir, I'm not sure what to do here. I've thought all this time I wanted to be a jet pilot. I've got a shot because of my grades, but you've made this helicopter thing sound pretty appealing. And I will never, ever forget this. He looked at me like dead in the eye and just said, hey, here's the deal. In a jet, Mach 2 is a number on a dial at 20,000 feet. But in a helicopter, 50 feet, 100 knots, looking into the eyes of the man who's trying to kill you, that will make your balls crawl up in your stomach. And I was like, okay, sold. Helicopters it is. And never looked back.
Oh, my gosh. I hope he got into sales. No, look, I won't dispute that at all. And I've always told people, going fast up high, unless you're passing some clouds, you don't really sense it. But you get down in the low-level environment, and certainly. Yeah, it's, obviously fun to think, right, what your life could look like if you had taken that one pivot, or if that one mentor in your life hadn't have intervened the way he did. And I guess what I'm trying to say is for those out there who maybe influence people, whether they know it and embrace it or not, well, you need to think about the way you're, influencing young people.
Absolutely. It worked out great for me. And every now and then I would wonder to myself, like, had I gone the other path, like, would I even have been any good at it? Would I have been, had the same experience, or would I have just been, dash for, guy in the squadron?
Would you have met your wife? Would you have had the kids you have and everything?
There's no telling what would have happened.
No, certainly not. Whiskey, when I think about a deployment, just based on my own career, I think of an entire squadron, let's say a VFA, so fixed wing Navy F-18s, and we'll get on a carrier together and we stay on the carrier. We might pull into port, we might fly operations, but we stay on the carrier. Was that your experience in the Marine Corps? I mean, your community, I think, does it a little different.
Yeah, we do. And it changed. So my very first deployment was in the summer of 2000, just a few months before 9/11 happened. So I'm a new guy.
2001.
Or 2001, yeah, sorry.
Okay.
So just a few months prior. And a 53 squadron is essentially built to be broken into three pieces, or a West Coast 53 squadron. So there's 4 squadrons, and they were on an endless rotation. Every 6 months, someone would go out, the next one would go after them, et cetera, et cetera. But what happens is 25% of the squadron would break off and become part of a Marine Expeditionary Unit, get on a ship here in San Diego, and go set sail and just be out there to be the tip of the spear. The other 75% of the squadron would deploy to Okinawa, Japan. And when they got there, another 25% would break off to be part of the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, which is based out of Okinawa. The 50% main body, as we called it, would stay in Okinawa and basically function like a normal squadron with half as many people and half as many aircraft, and then kind of bounce around the Pacific doing exercises. So my very first deployment, I was part of the main body that was going to go to Okinawa. I was not happy about it. I wanted to go on the MEU because that's supposed to be what like the cool good guys got to do. But so I stayed on the main body there, and we were just doing exercises and learning and working towards my first designation as an aircraft commander and really just having a great time. And at the time, it just seemed like this big adventure. You know, there was a lot of work, a lot of flying, but a lot of play too. You know, the work hard, play hard was prevalent. And we had this little lounge in the barracks we lived in on Marine Corps Air Station Futema in Okinawa, called the Echo Chamber, a reference to CH-53 Echo. And it was basically just this room, not too different than this one, slightly bigger, concrete walls that we built a little bar in, and we would just spend a ton of our free time in there. And it was all sea stories and drink beers and guys wrestling on
rock
the floor.
Music.
Yeah, your standard ridiculousness going on. And that's the room we were in when 9/11 happened, and I'll never forget that because it was nighttime in Okinawa. There was a typhoon inbound to the island, so we'd actually hangared all the aircraft and naturally went and bought all the beer we could find, brought it back to the Echo Chamber.
In case supplies.
Of course, yeah.
So.
The most important supply. We had plenty of that. And we were ready to ride out the storm. And we were just in there one night, that night, hanging out and doing what we do, and someone ran in and turned on the TV, and I'll never forget that moment because it was very sobering. And I think in that moment, all of us in that room knew what that meant and what we were about to have to do. In the Marine Corps, for me, changed significantly in that moment, very significantly, and I'll never forget that. I mean, it was like opening a whole new chapter of what was to come.
Yeah, my memoir also chronicles where I was and what I was doing on that day. And I think our generation, it's like our previous generation, our parents' generation remembers where they were when JFK was assassinated.
Yeah.
And for us, I remember that day just was a blur, but of all things, to try to have some semblance of normalcy, we ended up at the Fallon Oak Club that night. And I deliberately walked outside when they played colors and lowered the flag at the end of the day because I just knew, this is like the world will never be the same.
Yeah.
And I would say, sort of in a training environment. I was at Top Gun. So I knew I wasn't about to, get rushed off and go into it. But my previous squadron was deployed, and then they started employing pretty quickly. And sounds like you did as well. So you were the main body, the first deployment.
Yep.
You do 3 total deployments that first tour, right? But
4.
4,
Yeah,
my goodness.
4.
How long is a deployment for you? Because for me, they were 6 to 8 months.
6, yeah, same. 6
Really?
to
Wow.
7 months. So we finished that deployment, and there was a big spool up in Okinawa, we're going to go do something. We really didn't. We ended up flying down to Guam, formed a special purpose MAGTAF that hung out for 6 weeks and went back to Okinawa.
Yeah.
That was it. But then the Marine Corps started to really regroup and figure out what to do next. So we redeployed back here to California, did the usual post-deployment. I always called it seniors graduate. You get new freshmen, so you get all the new check-ins in the squadron, start training. And then we started hearing rumors that we were going to go to Iraq for what ultimately became Operation Iraqi Freedom. So we were home for about a year getting ready for that. And then that deployment, we actually got on Navy shipping here in San Diego, but it was really just a ride to the Middle East, not like a traditional MEU. We just steamed straight for the Persian Gulf and then sat there off the coast until it was time to go feet dry and get ready to start fighting. So that second deployment was a full, what came to be known as, we called them dirt debts, where the whole unit would go to Iraq or Afghanistan get off of Navy shipping or Air Force cargo, however we got there, and then just fight on the land for the entire deployment and then come home.
I think that is a paradigm shift between the Gator Navy, as we might call it for the Marines, and some of the stuff we do on the carrier. That the carrier, for whatever reason, was loath to ever send any of its assets ashore. It's like, I don't know if some politicians or high-ranking admirals or somebody said, no, this is its own unit, and we never want to do that. But I've got a line from your book I want to read because it makes me laugh, but it shouldn't. But of course, we know the ending because you're sitting here. But as OIF was kicking off, you went ship to shore, as I said, and there's this line in your book. With one engine down, and again, right, CH-53 has 3 engines. With one engine down and a full load of Marines, we were in a terrible situation. For about 1 second, I was super pissed off that I was going to die on my first combat flight. Talk about that flight a little bit. And again, readers can read all about it, but give us a summary of what's going on that first mission. And this is what, late March 2003?
March 20th. Yeah, March 20th, 2003.
Okay, and I'm on Nimitz out in like Hawaii, like trying to get into the fight, but didn't quite make it in time. Anyway.
First combat flight ever. And there was a huge buildup to this. Initial insert, crossing the border, et cetera, et cetera. So we'd been planning and doing exercises in Kuwait, tactical assembly area, Coyote is what it was called. All the Marines were staged there. But it finally came time to fly the mission, and the initial insert was actually supposed to happen the night prior, and I was part of, call it the second wave that would go in the following morning. But the night prior, the Marine Corps tried to fly the initial insert, and it went really badly. A CH-46, they got vertigo, they flew into the ground, lost that crew and the British commandos on board. The Brits ended up just driving over the border, but the following morning, a few hours later, we got the green light to go fly our insert. And at the time, I was still kind of, call it an up-and-coming guy in the squadron. I had a couple of quals, probably 800 hours-ish, and I was flying with our Squadron XO, who was great, mentor of mine, still a friend of mine. And so we were in this larger element of 53s that were going to go insert some reconnaissance Marines into the port of Qasr. And I'll never forget, flying across the border that day was just surreal. You're looking down and you're seeing a war happening on the ground below you. You can see people moving and shooting and tanks burning or, different vehicles burning. Like, it was very surreal. And as we lined up on final to land in this port, right away it didn't look good. So we're over the water in this port, and we're supposed to land really what was in a parking lot between these 2 warehouses. What we had not anticipated was that that parking lot was covered with sand, a lot of sand. So all of the elements going in ahead of us were browning out and hanging up. They were having a hard time. They're kicking up so much dust. They're having a hard time getting the helicopters down on the deck, which really starts stringing all of us out behind them. So we end up in the exact situation you don't want to be in as a helicopter guy. We call it a hoagie, hovering out of ground effect. You're high, hot, heavy. You have no airspeed, and certainly, fittingly, we lost an engine. And it was a compressor stall, which, sounds a little bit like machine gun fire. So for about a second there, I was like, I can't believe we just got shot down. And then, our XO I was flying with started yelling, we lost number 1, which snapped me back in, and we realized, okay, it's a compressor stall. But we really didn't have anywhere to go other than right in front of us. I was on the controls, he's yelling, so I start trying to get some forward airspeed on the aircraft, and I just knew I have to go forward and down and hopefully somehow bail us out at the bottom. But we were over the water, so my first concern was that we were going to land in the water. And then when I started to realize I think we can get beyond the water, there was a large cinder block wall, probably 10, 15 feet beyond where the water's edge was in this port. So my second concern was, we're going to hit that stupid wall and break this aircraft in half. So we're going to die that way. It was just, the whole situation was not good. So I was just hoping I could pull out a miracle and get us in front of that wall and maybe bail us out at the bottom. And the other part that was extra challenging was all that dirt that had been kicked up by the aircraft in front of us was keeping me from being able to see anything. So at a certain point, we're in the dirt cloud. Now I just can't see. So I'm flying this whole, call it approach, blind, literally. I can't see anything. But I know that at about 10, 15 feet, I'll see the ground. I'll pull whatever power we have left, and we'll see what happens. It's a miracle, but we cleared the water. We cleared the wall, 10 to 15 feet. I'm literally looking over my shoulder, see the ground, pull whatever we have left. We hit the ground so hard that I thought we had definitely destroyed the aircraft initially, but we hit hard, and then we didn't stop moving, and it took me a second to realize what was happening. But Browner, who I was flying with, he's yelling brakes, 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 and I'm yelling back at him, I'm on the brakes. But what was happening is the aircraft was just bouncing across the ground, kind of like this. It eventually came to rest, very left wing down and nose up, but everything appeared for the most part to still be working. The Marines in the back, God love them, jumped off and right into a gunfight like nothing had happened, which I felt was amazing to this day. They were amazing. And then as the dust cleared, we realized we were probably 5 feet from meshing rotors with the aircraft in front of us. So that was another close call that we survived. And then Browner and I kind of looked at each other and we're like, you know what? Let's just get out of here. I don't think we're going to stay here. Because once the Marines and the vehicles were off, we had enough power to take off with 2 engines. And we took off with 2 engines and got out of there. Went back to Kuwait, licked our wounds, and we're like, oh, wow, that was a crazy day. But that was my introduction to combat flying. Yeah. Very first combat flight.
Goodness. How many did you end up doing?
A few hundred.
Wow. Right. I mean, ultimately, Marines are adaptable. You got to deal with the situation that's leveled on you. But also, I mean, right, is there an element of I should go out and see what the aircraft is doing? Or is it more like, hey, they're off and I feel like I can fly it, so let's just get out
Well,
of
at the
here?
time, we just felt like getting out to take a look at the aircraft in the middle of a gunfight probably wasn't a good idea.
Fair.
So in terms of what our choices were, just trying to take off and fly away was probably our best bet. So we defaulted to that immediately, and it worked out.
So that was your first mission. You said you did hundreds. Would you say that was sort of typical of a mission, or is there such thing as a typical combat mission?
There really wasn't. I think what I learned over time is that with combat missions, you just have to be prepared for anything to happen. And so we generally, as 53s, flew 2 types of missions in combat. One was just your standard, we would call it hauling ass and trash. You have a pile of assault support requests, and you're just moving people and things around the battle space from fob to fob. It's very logistical in nature. So we did a lot of that. But then there were also what we called named operations. So this is a specific, more tactical mission that's going to integrate other types of aircraft, escorts, fixed wing, whatever's required for a raid or a tactical recovery of aircraft and personnel or something along those lines. And in my observation, or it's just how it was, all of those missions were designated with some cool-sounding name like Operation Matador. So and the name never made any sense, but it had a name. So we just started referring to it as named ops and everything else.
It was the next one, and
right.
they just pull it off the list.
So some days you go out to do some pretty routine, pile of assault support requests, and sometimes you'd be part of a named operation that had a much bigger planning cell, additional players, bigger things going on. And we did a mix of those. But what happened over time is initially in the 53s, we weren't doing a lot of the named operations in OIF-1. My squadron participated in the Jessica Lynch mission. I was not part of that. But a couple other things happened in that first deployment where we were in a few. And when we went back to Iraq the second time, we did a few more. And by the time we went back the third time, we did a whole bunch. And part of that was just because the tactics were evolving in theater as a country, not just as a Marine Corps, for how we were going about fighting the war. We became progressively more involved in the named operations. And so that mix became progressively more slanted towards these tactical operations and late night raids and some of these other things we were involved with. So it got progressively more interesting, if you will, over the course of my combat deployments.
Yeah. And you said late night raids. I was going to ask you that next. This first mission was daytime, thank goodness, based on what you faced. But were a lot of them at night as well? And what was that like?
Most of the named operations we flew were at night, but we also did just the standard assault support requests at night as well, just because the cover of darkness was an added layer of protection, for us as assault support guys. So a lot of it happened at night. And the Marine Corps really kind of slowly figured this out. OIF-1, it was cowboys and Indians. Like one day you're on the night schedule, the next day you're on the morning schedule, and guys were trying to flip back and forth, and crew day was a mess. By the second deployment, we came up with a more organized way to rotate people from like a day schedule to a night schedule. But what happened is the flight schedule started shifting towards midnight. So the day sections would say take off and fly evening into the night, and then what we called the morning shift would take off just after midnight and fly until around sunrise. So we slowly moved pretty much all of our flying to the hours of darkness, or as much as we could. which obviously adds a whole other layer of difficulty. So it's extra safety in terms of not being seen so that you can be shot down, but it's just more difficult flying, especially in places like Iraq and Afghanistan where you've got limited to no horizon on a normal day, and then you toss in a little bit of dirt in the air, and it was challenging at times, even with night vision goggles.
Well, I can only imagine. You remember how many hours you ended up with on goggles? I think I was like a few hundred.
Yeah, I ended up just shy of 1,000, I think, by the time it was all said and done. And a lot of that was red time. I just by virtue of timing, I ended up getting pretty much all of my qualifications by the end of my second tour in Iraq. And so when I went the third time and then back to Afghanistan later, I was almost exclusively flying at night.
You talked about the loss of the CH-46 earlier and all the folks on board. What was that like? I mean, on a daily basis, and again, you mentioned it in your book, Hangar 4, there's people you went to flight school with, there's people you know personally. I didn't recall you witnessing actually any mishaps, but I guess it wouldn't be called a mishap in combat. But what was that like, knowing that some of your friends are dying, but also that it's right around the corner for you? I mean, on your first mission, you almost died.
Yeah, it became real very quickly. And despite the fact that I'd had that close call on my first mission, I think I was just young and dumb enough not to be too affected by that. I honestly wanted just to get right back out there. But obviously there were things happening around me. The Marine Corps was losing aircraft. I was fortunate that in our squadron, my squadron, we didn't lose anybody on any of those deployments that I was on, which I still find miraculous. But it was always happening around you, right? We were close to it. So I lost a few friends along the way there early, but what happened for me, it was between my second and third deployment to Iraq, a very good friend of mine, we were close, that had gone from OCS to the basic school, the flight school together. You know, our families were close. Our first children were born around the same time. We spent tons of time together. But I was actually back here at Miramar in between deployments when I found out that we lost him in Iraq. And that one hit me really, really hard. That was the first time it was literally close enough to me that I couldn't compartmentalize it. I couldn't just ignore it. It hit me really hard. And that was a very difficult thing to navigate. But then what happened to me as a human being, and I can see this clearly now, I didn't see it as clearly then. At the time, I thought of it as I have to get my head back in the game because I was about to go to the weapons and tactics school as a student and then deploy one more time. So I didn't have a whole lot of time to process, to be in my feelings or any of that. It was like, hey, man, like the squadron needs you. It's time to go back to work. And I was able to flip that switch for myself. But when I did it, I really changed as a person. And I didn't totally realize that until later. And I'd already kind of been trending towards what I think of now as being pretty robotic with my emotions, but that sealed the deal. After that, everything was compartmentalized. I was armored up. No matter what happened around me, I was not affected by it. And I had, at that point, literally, I crossed over from not being scared of dying to just accepting that was probably going to happen and being okay with it. And that sounds probably crazy to say or for people to hear, but that's the place that I got to. I just sort of accepted at some point I'm probably going to die in this aircraft, and that's just how it's going to be. And I was okay with that.
Yeah. I'm always surprised when guests like you just did say that on the show. And I've had a couple other, and I'm picturing one, but I can't come up with his name because the camera's rolling. But it's almost like it's your body's way or your soul's way, maybe, of just saying, you've got a job to do, and let me not hang you up. So just keep moving forward. And you almost accept fate, maybe? I don't know. I don't want to get too poetic here. But let's switch subjects then and talk about WTI. So Top Gun, the movie, the first one, reflects a little bit Top Gun prior to 1996, in so much as a fighter pilot would leave the squadron, go through the course, and then come back to the squadron. Is that what you did at WTI? And then talk about when you're done with that first tour, you, in a sense, like Maverick, get invited over back. So is that how it worked?
That is exactly how it works. And going to that school was always my goal from the time, even before I got to my first fleet squadron. I knew what it was because of that mentor that I had in flight school. He was a WTI. And it's like the pinnacle qualification you can get as a Marine Corps aviator. That is the pinnacle qualification. And the school itself is extremely demanding and difficult, best of the best. Only they come here and graduate, et cetera. So to ultimately get selected to go was the goal I'd had all along. And then going through the school itself was a pretty amazing experience.
And what's the name of it again?
Weapons and Tactics Instructor's Course.
And
it's taught by Marine Aviation Weapons and Tactics Squadron 1, which is actually the shirt I'm wearing today. So that squadron's out in Yuma, Arizona, and they put this course on twice a year. And for the Marine Corps, it's rotary wing, fixed wing. We bring out an infantry battalion. The Marine Corps spends a lot of money to have all the adversaries. It's a fully integrated combined arms experience. But the focus is on fighting as a Marine Air Ground Task Force. So everyone's got to be totally integrated with each other. So a few weeks of intense academics followed by a few weeks of intense flying ultimately culminates in this giant final exercise. But awesome experience. And what the Marine Corps does is every squadron's required to have a certain number of graduates from this program, and then they go back to their squadron and typically are the pilot training officer. They work in operations, and they're really, I always thought of it as like the quarterbacks in the squadron. So any big mission comes up, one of your WTIs is planning and executing that mission. So after graduating, awesome experience, I go back to the squadron. I was the squadron WTI. At that point, I'm a senior captain, 03. And that's like the best job I ever had in my whole life, and will always be the best job I ever had in my whole life. You know, you're a senior captain, you've got some quals, you've got enough experience
but not all the
to know what you're doing,
responsibility
right? But you're not dealing with the headaches that the field grade are dealing with yet. You can still just talk smack about them and how terrible they are, even though you don't really understand what they're doing either. And I just got to be that guy for that deployment. And that deployment in 2005, my fourth on my first tour, third in a row to Iraq, was extremely rewarding for me because I was in that role. And there was just a lot going on in country. So at that point, we had kind of gotten turned loose. We were doing way more named operations. At that time, we were also, as a country, chasing Zarqawi around, trying to take him out. There had been this task force formed of super high-speed guys, Delta SEALs, CIA guys all cobbled together. We got to do a lot of work with them. So it was an incredible experience to get to do all of that. And I had a blast on that deployment.
All right, so someone has to train those WTIs. You already talked about MOTS 1, and so you're getting towards the end of that first tour, and what happens? Do you throw your hat in the ring, or do they call you up and say, hey, we liked when you came through, we'd like to invite you back?
Yeah, it's the latter. So
Okay.
I was actually in Iraq, still on deployment. I wasn't sure what I was going to do next. To be honest with you, I was burned out, or I was starting to feel the burnout.
Yeah.
My wife back home was definitely burned out. You know, we'd had a child somewhere in there, our first daughter, our daughter. And she'd, for the most part, been at home with her 3 years by herself, and we were trying to figure out what to do next. And I really wasn't sure if I even wanted to stay in the Marine Corps, not because I didn't love the Marine Corps, but just I was starting to feel like if I'm going to ever have something resembling a normal life, I might need to go do that sooner rather than later. But the guys at MOTS 1 reached out to me while I was in Iraq and said, hey, we'd like you to come back here and be an instructor. And to be honest with you, I was a little surprised, but very excited about the opportunity to potentially do that. I mean, it was my goal all along to graduate from the course, but to go back as an instructor is like a whole other level. And so I said, yeah, I'll do that, and talked my wife into moving out to Yuma, Arizona. I tried to convince her it would be a little bit of a break for us as a family. And in truth, it actually kind of was. You know, the trade-off is that you're in Yuma, not San Diego. But it was an amazing experience being on staff there.
Yeah. What was that like on a day-to-day basis? I mean, for me at Top Gun, it was long days, but it was, I would say, the high water mark of my career because you're surrounded by amazing people that are already taken from an amazing community, but you're just operating at such a high level. I would think it's like a Super Bowl winning football team or something.
It was the greatest organization I'll probably ever be a part of for that exact reason. You got a whole building full of guys who are all hand-picked from each type model series. Everybody's an expert. And you just learned a ton from each other. So we had these, call them cells, you know, assault support division with all the rotary wing guys on this side of the building and TAC air with all the fixed wing guys on this side. But we worked together really well. And that's really where I developed a real appreciation and understanding for what everyone else did. And I ultimately ended up being the assistant operations officer in that squadron. So then I had to know, like, in detail what everyone else did and really understand those missions, which was an amazing experience for me. Yeah. And from that day forward, everywhere I went in the Marine Corps, the guys that I was with at MOTS 1, were around. We all went back to the fleet as department heads together, all got recycled to the Pentagon together, all had command together. So it kind of became this little cadre that I will stay in touch with for the rest of my life.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. It's an amazing experience. You go back to the fleet, you go right back to Miramar and Hangar 4, hence the title of your book. What is that like now going back? Because before you came as a very hungry young pilot who clawed your way up and, like you said, did well and learned and experienced. But now you're coming back and you're going to probably be depended on to be leading a lot of those younger new pilots coming in, but also departments within the squadron. But you're going right back to some of the same places. That's got to add a new level of complexity, I feel.
Yeah, it really was. So we moved back here in the summer of 2010, and I got orders to go back to Hangar 4, to the same squadron I grew up in, actually, which was an interesting experience. Only now I was a major, and I was going to be the operations officer. And I knew, even before I checked in, that I was also going to take half of the squadron to Afghanistan later that year for a combat deployment. And at that time, the Marine Corps had switched it up again. So they were doing this thing in Afghanistan where they would send half of a squadron from the East Coast, half from the West Coast, mash them together, function as one unit for deployment, and then send them both home to their respective coasts. It was a terrible idea. They would never do that to an infantry battalion. But, hey, forget the 53 guys. We'll make them do this. This is a really awkward situation just from unit cohesion, culture, all of those things. But I was tapped to be the senior guy from the West Coast. So the East Coast Squadron for that rotation brought their lieutenant colonel commanding officer, but I was responsible for our half and kind of melding it together. So working up for that deployment was unique and different and difficult because I was going to be the operations officer for both halves. But to do that, I was having to constantly communicate with their operations officer on the East Coast to make sure the training plans matched up. Everyone was going to have everything they needed. Culminated in one big exercise out in 29 Palms where we all got to play together one time for a couple of weeks. And then we all went home on Christmas leave and then, met back up in Afghanistan a month later. Ended up being, I would say, the most rewarding deployment I ever did. It was very difficult initially melding those two halves of the squadron together. But fortunately, we got handed a couple of big missions early. And after we executed those, everyone came together and everything clicked. It was a classic case of drop enough adversity on a group of people, and if they respond right, you get a very good result. Yeah. That's really what happened.
Well, plus, right, a taste of success can really whet people's appetite to want more and work together and break down barriers or stovepipes. It's interesting, and I guess those who maybe don't serve might be surprised to hear that there are just little isms between different coasts, different bases, different squadrons. But I want to circle back to something we talked about before, because in my example, when I was in VFA, whatever, and we'd go deploy, our commanding officer and executive officer would take our squadron, our red room, and our aircraft and go. But you talked about being multi-sited, and so the CO can only be in one place. So you'd have, OICs? I don't know if that's what you call them in the Marine Corps.
Yeah, so typically the department heads, a department head, and you usually have to call it a handful of majors in the squadron, 04s, they would get divvied up to go be in charge of different pieces and parts. Yeah. And in some cases, might be a senior captain who's in charge of something for a period of time somewhere.
But do you bring your own aircraft, or do you maybe adopt what's there?
No, that is one of the complexities of being a rotor wing guy, is because it's so difficult to move aircraft around. Once the initial movement is made, say the aircraft that are in Iraq or Afghanistan, those are just the aircraft that are in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so when units are swapping out and relieving each other, they're literally trading aircraft on both ends of that turnover. So both would send an advance party in each direction to accept aircraft, do some functional check flight stuff, make sure everything's good, then accept them. But you're really just trading aircraft with other units endlessly.
Yeah. And this is where you hope that everyone is doing the maintenance by the book. But of course, you're looking through the books, and we all know that day-to-day life, things get missed or messed up or whatever the case is.
Absolutely.
You take what you got and you work with it. My goodness, that must have been a challenge. How did Afghanistan, you said 4 trips to Iraq?
3 to Iraq, and then I did the one to Afghanistan in 2011.
Before you went off to MOTS?
Yeah, so it was the UDP to Okinawa, then 3 in a row to Iraq. Okay. Then I went to MOTS. So then when I came back, I went to Afghanistan.
Right. How was Afghanistan at that point in your career, but especially compared to, because it sounds like your experiences were all based on Iraq and
They were.
how things work there. Afghanistan, I've been boots on the ground there. It's a different environment.
Very different environment. And I found it to be a lot more challenging, and I think all of us did. You've got an added layer in Afghanistan of real terrain, where Iraq was just this endless tabletop of flat desert. The terrain was a factor, but I also found the Taliban in Afghanistan circa 2011, I would say, was a much more worthy adversary than al-Qaeda in Iraq had been in the early 2000s. They could fight, and they were a little bit fearless, and you had to respect that, and it just added a whole other dynamic between that, the terrain, all the other crazy things that happen in a combat environment. It was extremely challenging.
Yeah. Did we overlap? I got there in the fall of 11. When were you there?
January 2011, we deployed and then ended up coming home. I think it was July.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, we just missed each other. Okay. So I don't want to hand wave this part of your career, but right, same thing. Now you're the 04 major that you loathed, according to your book, as a young lieutenant and captain. That's right. And then you go off and pay your penance at the Pentagon. We don't have to talk about that if you don't want. But I guess ultimately what I'm curious to know is when you look at the spectrum of your life, you start off as this, hey, I think I want to go do that. You tell your dad having a drink in the driveway one night. And at some point you get selected to lead the whole squadron. And all those different breakups that you talked about, like, hey, I'm going to have some folks over there. Maybe they're led by a very capable 03 or 04, but I'm still ultimately in charge of the squadron. So what is that like?
That was an amazing experience as well. I mean, it was truly an honor to get selected for command of a squadron, but I knew going in that it was really about stewardship, right? It was not about me. It's about the Marines. I wanted them to have a great experience, but also just be a great steward to the squadron, the history, the traditions, all the things. So for my deployment as a commanding officer, at that point, the wars are winding down, and we had resumed, call it the old routine of breaking the squadron into three pieces. You put out a Marine Expeditionary Unit, go to Okinawa. Another small group goes to 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, main body stays. So it kind of like came full circle for me from Okinawa, my first deployment, as a young lieutenant, to now at the end as the commanding officer of the squadron. Pretty cool experience, though. We had a great unit. I had some really strong majors that I appreciated, some great staff NCOs, senior captains. I mean, every level of the squadron, we had great leadership, which made my job pretty easy. But it was a fun deployment. It was a nice way to change it up and call it end it for me, as far as deployments go. Bounced around the Pacific, went to the Philippines. At one point, we had pieces of the squadron, like you said, operating in 4 different countries simultaneously, which was pretty neat for me as the leader to just watch my Marines out there doing that, really without any help from me whatsoever, like you said, other than just sitting back there waiting to be responsible, God forbid, if something went wrong.
Well, you're of course minimalizing your impact. You're setting the environment. You're ensuring, maintenance by the book and standards and all that. You get close to 20 years, which is when you can retire and keep benefits and pay and all that. What's going through your mind? And maybe it's not just yours, maybe it's your family's, but what decisions are you grappling with by the time 2016 is rolling around and you're looking at 20 years of service already?
One of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but I definitely made the decision to depart at year 20 really based on 2 things. One, my family at that point, I felt like they were pretty done. It had been a pretty intense pace for all of us throughout my time in the Marine Corps. And we were back here in San Diego for the 3rd time, which it always kind of felt like home to us. We used to jokingly refer to it as our Marine Corps home. But both my wife and kids were like, hey, if it's at all possible, can we just kind of get off this train and stay here and try to have a normal life, which was a request that I respected a lot. But I also just knew for myself, and this has slowly built up over time. I talked about earlier that close friend of mine dying in 2004 and how that affected me. I was still that same person, and I knew I was still pretty locked up, and I would kind of joke and refer to myself as a robot. And I just felt like for me as a human being, I needed to figure that out sooner rather than later. And I felt normal, or what had come to be normal for me at the time, but I was concerned that if I didn't unpack that, at some point it was going to come back to bite me. And I didn't want to be someone that a few years later, say, goes off the rails and everyone's like, what happened to that guy? He always seemed like he had it together.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure that was going to happen, but I was aware that it could. And that was enough of a reason for me as an individual to say, okay, you should probably go do something different now and kind of figure this stuff out and at least attempt to have something resembling a normal rest of your life. So I felt like that was just the right time to do it, and that was the decision I made, so we did.
Whiskey, I feel like ours is the generation that went from suck it up, kid, or rub some dirt in it, or it's not okay to show your feelings, to the generation that's like, look, we have to embrace that people are not okay.
Yeah.
And it's okay to not be okay. And you said the word feelings before I did, so I'm going to put that on you, Marine. But no, but that's the point, right? It's like, even in the airline industry, I remember seeing something on the news the other day, some politician or somebody was like, well, what would you rather have flying your airplane, a pilot on medication for depression or a depressed pilot? Because those are your choices. And I can't help but wonder, like, all right, I guess this is good. It's just that it's hard for us. Maybe our kids are growing up with it's okay to expose the feelings. But for you, being a very manly Marine, flying a beast of an aircraft, I don't know, did you struggle with that, or did you just kind of have the realization, like, look, I know there are people out there that have these hidden demons. And it sounds like, based on what you said earlier, and I'll stop talking in a second, that you had them, but you were kind of packing them inside. And you can only pack so much, and things are going to come exploding out.
Yeah, and that's really, call it the course of the way this worked out for me, is I did grow up that way, right? I mean, my dad was a hard ass growing up, high school football coach and athlete, and you be tough, and everything is about physical and mental toughness. And I carried that with me into the Marine Corps, and frankly, it served me very well.
I'm sure.
And then I sort of became this person that I never would have thought I could become, in terms of just my ability to mentally and physically do things that I would have never thought possible. But I was very robotic, and I knew it. I'd turned into this almost like machine-like person that thrived in that environment, actually loved the environment, wanted to do it forever, but at the same time, I described it as an addiction. It's like loving something, knowing that it's probably slowly destroying you at the same time. Like, I love this so much, but it's probably low-key slowly killing me. It may just blow me up one day if I'm not careful. And just, I'm thankful that I had the awareness, or enough awareness of that, to then go do something about it, or at least try to get back in front of it and sort of unpack those things. Best decision I've ever made for myself as a person in my life.
All right, not to go off on a tangent, though, but is that wrong? So, for example, I never played football. My mom wouldn't let me, frankly. But I watch NFL players because I enjoy the sport, and they're just getting beat up. And by the time they're 45, 50, if they make it that long, they can't barely walk. They can't, from what I see, and I'm generalizing. Now, some would say that's so wrong. But I would argue, if that's what you felt like you were put on earth to do and you loved it while you did it, is it wrong? And I don't know if there's necessarily a question here or not, but I feel like, I'm not saying you made the wrong decision.
Yeah.
But for guys who maybe didn't have the pull of a family or just did love the rush, that maybe if that's how you live and you don't live till 100, but by God, you live a full life to 30 or 40 or whatever, 50, is that wrong?
I don't think it's wrong at all, honestly. I 100% get it. And if I had just done whatever I wanted to do without consideration for anyone else, I'd probably still be out there flying crazy missions for some off-the-record government agency who's doing things because that's what I loved doing. Then I was 100% okay with whatever the consequences of that were for me. It was really just understanding that I kind of had, or I did have, responsibility to other people that I had to take into consideration at some point, and a little bit of, call it dad guilt, for feeling like I hadn't taken that into consideration up to that point. So for me, I started feeling really selfish is probably the best word, that I can keep doing this and I like it and I'm totally okay with whatever the consequences are. But for these people over here that are depending on me, that's probably not fair to them. So I had to make that exchange, and that was my initial motivation. But I also knew for myself, my own longevity or whatever, that was probably the better option for me as well.
So 2017, you retire from the Marine Corps. What do you do?
So what I really wanted to do, what I fell in love with in the Marine Corps was the Marines. I loved the leadership piece. I loved trying to get a few hundred people on the same page, going in the same direction. And I did also really love the flying. But because I'd done so much combat flying, flying in a non-combat environment, even in the Marine Corps, had become boring to me. It was really hard for me to get myself in the right mindset to go do that. And I felt that if I flew in the civilian world, that would probably be even more exacerbated for me. And I would just be sitting there being like, wow, this is nowhere near as interesting as 2011 Afghanistan, for lack of a better way to put it. So I decided the operations lane of business was where I wanted to go, frankly, just to lead people. And operations is really mostly people process. How do you make things more efficient? And at the end of the day, now you're in companies out in the civilian world, it's about the bottom line. But you still get to have those people, get everyone, integrated, organized, and going. So I've worked for a couple different private companies, here in San Diego as an operations executive. I've enjoyed that. I also have a little consulting company on the side called Ready Room Consulting originally, where I can go in and help other small to medium-sized companies kind of just streamline their operations, work on people, leadership things, and I enjoy doing that as well. So those things are things that I do. I also volunteer a fair amount of my spare time. Mostly to military and veteran organizations. So support the Enlisted Project here in San Diego. I've been a board member there for a few years. They do great things for our junior enlisted, Marines and sailors. I've also volunteered with Veterans Writing Group of San Diego County, which encourages veterans to come in, write stories, share stories. I try to spend some time with them, which is good. And then recently got introduced to and trying to do what I can for a new initiative called Project Restore Hope, where it's a nonprofit that's basically taking an old VFW out on the beach and turning it into a wellness center for veterans. So instead of a place to come, have beers and be sad, it's more of a place to come and really focus on wellness and togetherness and some peer support. So I'm excited about helping them now as well.
That's very cool. All right, if you're willing, I'd like to pivot to the part of the show where I can put questions to you that the folks that are generous enough to support the Fighter Pilot podcast put to me, because I say, hey, I'm going to sit down with Isaac Lee and ask him about his book, Hangar 4. So the first question is from Derek Burney, who says, what was your favorite type of mission to fly? And he's got a caveat here. And it could be your favorite for any reason. Most satisfying to help others, most demanding, most fun, most satisfying when done well. And so you've already talked about any other flying wasn't that exciting. So my guess is you're going to answer something from either Iraq or Afghanistan.
Yeah, I would say there were two mission sets that were my favorite. So I'll touch on both. The first one was raids, which we got very good at, and I got to fly a lot of in Iraq, which is a raid is we have a target, typically a human being, and we are going to go try to literally catch this person somewhere around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, wherever they are. They required just a ton of integration. You had other players. We had the fixed wing guys up there above us with lightning pods and relaying what was happening on cell phones. They were just always really exciting. It was almost like police work to put all these assets together and go try to catch this person. Mm-hmm. So those were always fun. And then the second one, I would say that was fun and it was hard, but there were a lot less of them, fortunately, were tactical recovery of aircraft and personnel, or a TRAP mission. I got to fly one of those in Afghanistan in 2011 where we recovered a downed Army CH-47, and that was the craziest mission I ever flew in my life and also the most satisfying. But we actually flew out to the Pakistani border in the middle of the night, got this aircraft, brought it back, and it was actually belonged to the same unit who ended up catching bin Laden a few months later. But that mission was nuts. So those two profiles were my favorite.
I'll bet. When you talk about the first mission, the raids, I don't know, tell me a little bit about how that works. We don't have to spend too much time on it, but I mean, you're a big aircraft.
Yep.
You're noisy. Of course, you're flying at night probably mostly for these.
Middle of the night.
But I mean, how do you do that? I mean, I guess it's not a surprise by the time you show up.
Sort of, yeah. So essentially the way it would work tactically is you would have them in this house or compound where you believe the target is. There'd be typically 2 to 4 53s with the ground force in the back. You'd have advanced escorts. So we'd start with, frankly, the fixed wing guys up high with their sensors and say, hey, everything's good.
Okay.
You're looking good coming in. And then we'd push skids in front of us just to do a quick sweep and sanitization. But as they're doing that sweep and sanitization, we're on short finals. So there's very little time from when, call it the jig is up, to where we're landing literally in your front yard and 24 Marines are piling out the back of my aircraft. And when you have a few aircraft involved in that, then typically now you got 48 to 96 Marines, on the objective area, grabbing this one person, bring them right back out, put them in your aircraft, and you go. But it was wild. It was the Wild West. Very fun.
My goodness. All right, John Clark wants to know, did you face degraded performance, we talked about that, or outright failures in the CH-53 in combat, and how did you handle them? We talked about the first one. Tell me a little bit more, and it's in the book. Like, what did you do when you went back to the ship? Because you had degradations, to John's point, but you didn't always have what you might do, say, in Miramar in the middle of peaceful Southern California.
Yeah, that was tough because we had to get the aircraft back to the ship. And landing on the ship under normal conditions is difficult in a 53. It's just a very awkward aircraft to land on a ship. It's so large, 100 feet long. There's a uniqueness to the 53 that really messes with the pilots who fly it, is that both seats are canted in just a couple of degrees, almost to the point where you can't notice it. But then what happens is your natural tendency is to make yourself perpendicular or in line with the ship's surface. But if you do that, that means your tail's kicked out to one side or the other, depending on what seat you're sitting in. So you have to kind of get used to having this slightly unusual view, knowing that means your aircraft is straight. Meanwhile, you're looking down the deck just like for you guys, and you're watching the thing go up and down, and every now and then the deck will catch you before you catch it, and then an inexperienced pilot will get nervous, pull power. It's a whole thing. Yeah. So landing that particular aircraft on the ship, we had to call back to the air boss and really just ask him to clear off not only what we call spot 9, the most aft spot on the ship, but the surrounding area just in case. And I'm still kind of amazed they actually did it and let us land. I half expected them to say, no, go back to Kuwait and figure it out there. Yeah. But they did, and it worked out. What had happened is we collapsed one of the struts on the main landing gears, and which is why we're sitting very awkwardly, and we'd actually cargo strapped that whole strut to the frame so it wouldn't fall off. But we weren't sure what was going to happen when we sat down on the ship. Is it going to totally collapse or whatever? Thankfully, it didn't. We got it on the ground or got it on the deck, and everything was fine. Shut her down and managed to walk away.
But you had, I think, right, some issue with the blade and some duct tape.
Yeah, we literally had the top of that main mount strut had shot a hole in one of our main rotor blades about the size of a softball. So we had a bad blade, obviously. And we literally had just duct taped that blade and then flew back to the ship. It was classic Marine Expeditionary 101, figure it out and get the aircraft back.
Balance was important and all that.
Yeah, it was a rough ride, but, but it worked out.
Well, to John's point, we talked about your very first combat mission. Were there others where you had similar situations, failures?
Losing engines wasn't too uncommon, but mostly it wasn't too big of a deal. So because we had 3 of them, and then just your other standard run-of-the-mill stuff. Lost a couple of rotor dampers. And when that happens, what happens is the entire rotor head gets out of balance and you really can't fly for long. But it's like flying a washing machine that's out of balance. The whole aircraft is just, it's not fun. Yeah. But that would happen on occasion. But really, more than the mechanical challenges, the dust in the environment was the biggest challenge, and even more hair-raising at times, because especially in Iraq, you get these haboobs that roll through that just look like something out of the movie The Mummy, where you've got this wall of dirt that's a few thousand feet tall.
But it's like rolling at you almost, right?
Yeah. Running into one of those guys in the middle of the night is no fun. I did that a couple times, and that's a wild ride fighting through that. But I was always more concerned about those than I was something mechanical. Yeah. Most mechanical issues, you can at least get the aircraft on the ground.
Did you ever come back and then find bullet holes in your aircraft?
Amazingly, no, not in mine. So of all the times I got shot at, I never got hit. So I managed to keep a pretty good streak going.
You're a big airplane, a big aircraft too.
We had it happen in the squadron for certain, but never in the aircraft I was flying when I was flying it.
My brain, whenever I'm recording, always confuses aircraft and airplane, right? So aircraft is like the parent category, airplane or helicopter.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right, one more question from Michael Tennish, my friend in Switzerland. Is there a particular memory of a mission in which you transported or supported Marines, and I added this part to it, not mentioned in your book, that has stayed with you to this day? Did you have to make some choices on what went in the book, or did you pretty much cover everything?
Well, I made some choices. I mean, obviously flying hundreds of missions, there were different pieces and parts that were more pertinent. So I tried to put the ones in the book that were the most impactful for me, or that something happened that was just something I would never forget, But as Operation Matador, which is in the book, But it was a big mission we flew in 2005. It was intended to be this giant mission to catch Zarqawi, and that was like the night we were actually going to get him. And I'll never forget that one, mainly just because the build-up to it was so massive that by the time we actually launched, it felt kind of anticlimactic. But I used it as the opening chapter in the book. It's the only thing that's not in chronological order. The lieutenant from the Marine platoon that we were carrying was sitting on my jump seat, and I just never forgot what he said. And he was sitting there messing with his MVGs, and he thought they weren't working because it was so dark. And I remember just kind of chuckling to myself. I could see what he was doing. And then he finally said, like, "Hey, sir, something's wrong with my goggles. Like, I can't see anything." And I was just like, "No, man, your goggles are working fine. That's low light."
Yeah.
And he's like, "How do you guys do this? How are you going to land?" And I just said, "That's the interesting part." And I could tell it just like blew his mind. Like, you guys are so crazy. I can't believe you're actually doing this. And it struck me as funny because I was thinking the same, like, it really is crazy. But we're out here doing this like every night. Like, it's just become what we do.
Well, that's what you're trained to do. And
yeah,
you do relay that early in the book. It's a bit more colorful in there. I appreciate you keeping this family friendly. But as you said at the top, right? I mean, that is how you guys lived.
Yeah.
And that's probably partly a defense mechanism or a coping mechanism of what we do is very consequential. So
yeah,
we're not going to make it PG necessarily.
For sure.
Whiskey, as we think about wrapping up, there's a part in the beginning of your book that I want to read back to you. You wrote it, but for everyone else, I think this is a great segue to, again, wrap up and think about the Marines' 250th birthday. You wrote, "The Marines I served with were a daily inspiration. If Hollywood assembled a team of its best writers, they couldn't possibly dream up a cast of characters more remarkable and entertaining than the Marines who exist in every battalion and every squadron in the Corps. The blend of intellect, badassery, and jackassery in the Marines comprising those units is truly awe-inspiring. Marines will say and do the funniest things you've ever seen or heard 2 seconds before and after a near-death experience." As we mark this month's 250th anniversary of the Marines, I mean, God bless them. Is there anything more to say than that? I feel like that encapsulates it pretty well.
I felt like that was a pretty accurate summary of what I experienced. And for the rest of my life, I'll feel fortunate to have been able to do so.
Yeah, terrific. Well, so what are you doing now? You talked about doing different things. And by all means, if you've got something you want to pitch, if you've got a website or something for the consulting you do, but what are you doing now and what's the future hold? I mean, more of the same, stay in SoCal, maybe any other books? I'm just laying all this out there.
Yeah, so we've been here in San Diego since I transitioned out in 2017, been working as an operations executive. Recently got to a place where I think I want to take a little break and just focus on my consulting company and writing for a little while, and I'm fortunate to be able in a position to do that. So I've still got, my website, isaacglee.com is up. That's where book things will be. I'm working on another one, but the one I'm starting to work on now is more of it'll be more tied to the consulting that I do, kind of lessons learned in the military, how they apply to business, tie these things together. But I enjoy doing that and working with different companies and organizations on everything from leadership to streamlining operations. So I want to do that for a while. Our son's in his last year of high school, so that'll give me a little more time to spend with him while we've still got him. And then my wife and I are very much at a place where we're trying to decide, well, what do we really want to do now that we're on the cusp of being empty nesters? So, fortunately, we're in a position where we can kind of go where we'd like to go and do what we'd like to do. So we're still negotiating on where that's going to be and what exactly that's going to look like. But I hope that by the end of the year, we'll have some decisions there and we'll put that into motion.
Yeah. I have to wonder, Isaac 1.0, 2.0, which one does she like better? I think I can guess, but is there a part of 1.0 she misses a little bit?
I give her a ton of credit. She put up with that version for quite a while. But I think she's appreciated our life being a little slower, a little less crazy, me being around a little more. There's a part of me that will always be that version, and it comes out at different times. But she's become progressively more tolerant of it over time. I think my kids find it more amusing than she does, but it is what it is. But yeah, it's going well.
The consulting thing, is that something, are you ready to go with a website or like what kind of companies might want to contact you?
That's all coming together. It's called Ready Room Consulting, fittingly. The Ready Room is where everything begins and ends in terms of planning for execution. But yeah, that's coming together now. Website isn't quite up. It'll probably be up by the time the episode airs, but it'll be linked to isaacglee.com.
Okay.
I'm easy to find on LinkedIn, social media, etc. So basically, small to medium-sized companies looking to grow, looking to streamline your people and process, and reach out. I'd be happy to help.
Awesome. Any more books in the future, you think?
Definitely the one that I'm working on now for the
Okay.
consulting company. And then I may do one more after that. You know, I feel like I'm sort of in this endless transition to life after the military, and I've had a lot of interesting experiences and learned some lessons, good and bad, along the way that I might impart at some point. But that's kind of another idea I have. We'll see if I get to that one.
Well, we'll welcome you back anytime if you've got something you want to
Thank
share
you.
on the show here, or let us know. Whiskey, this has been great. I've been looking forward to this for a while. Sometimes I'm the one who plays hard to get. In this case, I know you were always willing to come in and talk about your book, and I've just been pretty busy. But this went the way I figured it would. I was a little nervous you were going to be as colorful as the book. But so for those out there that are looking for the true gritty world of flying CH-53s in the Marine Corps, it might not be for the young people that are squeamish about certain concepts and words, but it's a really enjoyable book, and I think everyone should go out and find it. And where can it be found? You said isaacglee.com.
Yeah,
I'm
you
guessing
can hit
also
my
Amazon.
website there, but Amazon obviously is the fastest and easiest. BarnesandNoble.com as well. Those are the places that'll get it to you the quickest.
All right. Terrific. Well, before we let you go, a couple administrative issues. Isaac Lee, call sign Whiskey. Tell us a quick story about how that came to be.
I'll apologize in advance to you and all my other Navy friends. I got in trouble for drinking on the boat, on the ship, on the way home from OIF-1.
I never did that.
Yeah, of course. No, I never did it.
I never got in trouble.
I was just bold enough to do it in a way that I got caught. But the upside was that I ultimately got a good call sign out of it, despite the fact that it was a little touch and go there for a little while. I thought I may have totally torpedoed myself. But I managed to come away with just a few bumps and bruises, and ended up being Whiskey for the rest of my career.
Terrific. Well, it sounds like it didn't hurt you at all. I mean, you ended up being a WTI, a MOTS instructor,
I did.
and even a commanding officer. My goodness. Well, Whiskey, I want to bestow upon you our highly valued Fighter Pilot Podcast guest. I should maybe change the name for some of you, like Helicopter Pilot Podcast. But at any rate,
that's
I hope
awesome.
you will
Thank you.
put that somewhere you care about.
Absolutely.
Or you can also throw it in the trash if you want. But
No, that's great.
at any rate, this being, again, the Marines 250th, and this being your chance to talk about your book, sir, I will give you the last word.
No, just thank you again for having me. Great experience. Appreciate getting to have the conversation. And I just feel fortunate that I've been able to share this story, not only for myself, but just for all the other Marines who were part of those CH-53 squadrons over the course of that time period. You know, that was one of the other reasons I wanted to write it. No one had written about the 53s since Vietnam. So it's neat to have the story out there, and I know it's meant a lot to those guys too.
All right. Awesome. Well, thanks for coming today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for watching this episode of the Fighter Pilot Podcast. I hope you learned something new. I still do every time. Now, in case some jargon snuck by you did not understand, well, head on over to our website, fighterpilotpodcast.com, where we have a glossary and a lot of other offerings you might find interesting. And for exclusive content, head on over to our Patreon page. Thanks again.